So, Kristina, I want to just take the beginning of this and kind of like dive into where you're from, kind of how you got connected with New Hope. Are you from around here?
Not originally, but I've been around here long enough that I might as well be.
Where are you actually from?
I was actually born in Bolivia and grew up
Wow.
in Central America. My dad was a foreign liaisons officer for the U.S. Army, so I had a very cultural upbringing and loved every bit of it. And he made the decision towards my teens to go ahead and retire. And we wound up he wound up retiring into Brandon, Florida area. So for middle school and high school, I was here in Florida in this area. And we actually started a home church not too far from New Hope and went there for many years, went through youth group there and everything. And it was sometime in the last 10, 15 years, my father made the decision to switch churches. And when I moved back to the Brandon area after having been over in Polk County for a very long time, I decided, well, let me try it out. And I fell in love with it.
So you actually grew up around church leaders.
Yes, absolutely. Basically, from my very upbringing, I mean, I was baptized when I was a baby. And my dad was always very consistent about making sure that we went to church. My mom too. So yeah, it's always been an integral part of my church or of my life. And even having strayed from it at various times in my life, it's where I come back to. It's my faith.
And your dad helped plant this church out there that you kind of grew up in?
No, the church was already here. It was
Okay.
just a couple blocks from here. We just found it as a church home and attended for many, many years.
So what was the transition like coming from a foreign country, knowing that, you know, you're obviously from America, your family's from America, but you were born in a foreign country and kind of growing up in that culture and then actually coming back to the United States?
It's actually been very good. There was some culture shock for sure, especially in coming to Florida. You know, I've lived a few other places in the States as well, but Florida was a culture shock for me. You know, especially when it came to things like race. I never really saw color growing up. I had no idea until I saw pictures later on that my best friends were of different races and different ethnic origins. And it was shocking to me to come to the States and find that race was a big thing. To find that for me to have a friend of another color was taboo, for not only for me, but for them. So that aspect of it was really difficult. But other than that, because there was so much military influence in my upbringing, you know, it was a fairly smooth transition, but I think there's a lot of cultural norms too that were very different, especially coming to the States and going into public school as a teenager. Very tough transition there. You don't know what to wear, how to wear your hair, and most of those things that just make your teenage years really, really tough.
Yeah.
But overall, I'm really grateful for the experiences that I've had growing up and the different cultural exposures.
Have you been back since then?
I have traveled a little bit here and there. I have not gone back to any of the places that I lived as a kid. Mostly just the political climate in many of those areas is not very friendly.
Right.
I have had a chance to go back to Peru on a missions trip, and then I took about 3 days to go up to Cusco and then to Machu Picchu to visit. So that was as close as to Bolivia as I've gotten in a while. But I do try and travel whenever possible. It's in my blood now. I enjoy cultures from everywhere.
Do you have plans to maybe go back there one day and see your childhood roots?
I would love to, as long as it's safe.
Of course, if we want it safe. Yeah, definitely. But that would be awesome for you to do that at some point. You know?
Yes.
And you have a wonderful daughter too.
Yes.
And I'm sure she would love to go back and see where you grew up as well. Oh,
she loves it when we go on trips. I got to take her to Italy a few years ago, and she's got the travel bug too. So I would love to certainly travel more with her.
Well, listen, I one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on is because at New Hope, and you've been a part of this church now for some time, and you were very instrumental in helping us get a recovery group here at this campus called Celebrate Recovery. And since then, this location has become sort of, I don't want to call it a mecca, but it's become sort of a hub for a lot of recovery groups. We have several different AA groups, as well as NA groups, as well as a GA group that kind of flexes in back and forth. But Celebrate Recovery came in with the help of you. And I was wanting to know if you wanted to share a little bit about your recovery and why you chose to kind of get involved with CR.
I would absolutely love to. And I'll try and keep the tears to a minimum, but it's a journey that has been literally life-changing, not just for what it did in recovery for me, but just for who I am as a person and who I am in my faith. I had a good childhood. I had a good upbringing. I went to college. I got a master's degree. I was about halfway through my course in doctorate work, and then family life happened. But, I had it all. I had the house, the husband, the kid, the typical picket fence, and the boat and the motorcycle and the car, and the 11-year career. And I lost my mom. And she'd had a long battle to cancer. So there was something sort of ingrained in the process that told me that I shouldn't grieve because her suffering's over, that, I've already had my time of grieving in that time that she was suffering through cancer, and, that I had to hold together for my family. And in doing that, I internalized everything, which started a very self-destructive pattern for me. Continued one, actually. Always been very self-sufficient, very independent, and very headstrong, which is fine to a point, except when you refuse to realize you've hit your limits. Mm-hmm. For me, hitting my limits looked like, I'm going to do me. I'm tired of this life. I'm tired of the way my marriage is going. I'm tired of the way my job is going. I'm going to do me, and I'm going to worry about me. And I fell into the trap of what I call the great American me disease. And by becoming that self-centered person, I thought I was doing, the right thing. I even justified it in the sense that I've taken care of others for so long. God wants me to take care of me. Well, that led into some good behaviors, going to martial arts and taking time for myself. And it led into destructive behaviors where I wound up going out and drinking and starting to create new friends that were not friends, and fall into a lifestyle of addiction. It was a slow process, but it was, once it had its hold on me, that was it. Through the course of that, I was already going through a divorce. I was going through a foreclosure on the house. This was just mostly during the times of, drinking and what have you, but I was so centered on myself, and then became so centered on the divorce and this battle, this me versus him mentality, that everything else that was important went by the wayside. My own health, my own mental health. And then that's when the choices started happening of to numb the pain, to make it go away, and to do whatever I could to make it do that. And wound up addicted to drugs. I was definitely not the typical case study by any means, but I'm proof that it can happen to anybody. My journey was long. There was a lot of that. I'm going to kick this myself. I'm going to do this myself. The battles with I'm not really addicted. I can quit anytime I want to the point where it really comes down to the first principle of any recovery group is to admit that you're powerless. And that's really what it finally took, is to realize, I don't want this anymore. I don't want this life. Don't want what I've done to my life, to those around me that I love. And became the long, slow journey of pulling myself back out. But through that process, because I did it through a faith-based recovery program, and realizing that the higher power that I needed was the higher power I've known all along, and it's Jesus Christ. And owning that, and truly, really submitting when I had nothing to gain and nothing to lose from it. That's really where recovery happens, I think. Mm-hmm. It's they talk about like hitting rock bottom and things like that, but I think it's really not so much the rock bottom as much as it is the full and total submission. Yeah. I think that's the start of the journey. That is a long, tough recovery road. But when you get through that and you find what life is truly like on the other side, what joy is truly like, what contentment and peace are like,
Liberation.
it is. It's not the euphoric feeling that so many people chase. It's
Right.
peace. And I couldn't help but want to share that with others, because I saw it in my friends at the time. I see it in people now. Everyone is searching for that.
Yeah.
And everyone should have a chance to find it.
In your journey, when you were struggling and knowing your relationship with God and being, I guess, in the place that you were, did you have people reach out to you and try and help you with the intent that God was with you, or God was going to help you, or we'll pray for you, or we want to pray for you? And did you have that mentality that ain't going to do it?
At times,
Yeah.
there were times that certainly I clung to it because I was looking for a lifeline.
Mm-hmm.
But I was looking for a lifeline without being willing to leave everything else behind. So I was basically playing tug of war between this lifeline that I was handed and wanting to hold on to certain aspects of my behavior that I wasn't ready to let go of. I think my faith honestly did me a lot of good, in the sense that in the back of my mind, I always knew that if I truly stopped and turned it over to God, he could do wonders. He could perform a miracle. I was too prideful to lay it down. I was too prideful to accept those hands that reached out to me and said, hey, let me pray for you. Let me help you. And to the point that also the people that I was exposing myself to, those helping hands were usually with a catch. So I wouldn't accept the helping hand, either one, because I didn't want it, or two, because I knew there was a catch. So it really took me getting to that place of complete desolation and aloneness to reach out myself, and to reach out to the only one I knew could help me, and that was God.
Yeah. Do you feel that if you'd have gone through, and I don't know if you did, I don't know if you tried a regular 12-step program, but do you feel like the Christ-based one was that much more important to you than a regular 12-step?
Absolutely. Because I think regular 12-step programs are great, and they do work for people that continue to work them. But, you're putting a power in something that hasn't had a real and personal encounter with you necessarily.
Right.
And it becomes intangible. It becomes something that I know there's something out there that's looking out for me. I know that there's some greater force in this world. But when you have it something tangible that you can actually have a personal relationship with, like Jesus Christ, it changes everything. It becomes someone you can talk to. It
Mm-hmm.
becomes someone that you can lean on, literally like another person, but so much better, that it becomes the foundation for everything. There's a whole book that every 12-step program honestly is written on. Every 12-step program is written on the concepts of the Bible.
Yeah.
It was just de-Christianized in order to provide a more neutral platform for people who were reluctant to really receive religion.
Yeah.
But the fundamentals are from Christ.
Yeah.
It's the fundamentals for everything in our life. It's not just addiction. It's anything that we're trying to deal with. You have to become to a point where you're powerless over it, and that you accept God's help to change.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that too, because recently they've been going through a study here at church called Compelled, and it's kind of geared towards everybody sharing their story and bringing their story and sharing it with somebody, and in hopes that might, kind of spark something in them. And the idea is to have everybody start thinking about writing their own story and sharing their own story. And I was thinking to myself, there's no greater stories about coming to Christ than there are in recovery.
Yes.
And have you ever found it in just in your time in recovery where you have seen people go to a sort of a neutral, sort of secular 12-step program, and they just were still empty, and they didn't really make it happen for themselves until they came to a Christ-based recovery?
I've seen it a lot, actually. One of the passions that God has put in my heart through recovery is intervention. And I can usually tell when I meet an addict that is looking to just escape the life because it's miserable, or looking for something better. Those are two things that motivate people. Either they're so miserable they need out of it, or they want something better so bad that they go for it.
Mhm.
And I see the difference in those addicts, and I see the difference in the cultures that people go through. I mean, don't get me wrong, I attend NA, I've attended other meetings as well, but I think it really comes down to that person. And if you want more, you get more. You seek more and you find it. But having Christ at the center of it is, it's just kind of like plugging it into a 220 volt system. It's,
Yeah.
you get that much more power out of what you're doing because you have a savior who loves you, who wants you to succeed, and has given you these principles to walk by, and it's in every aspect of life. So
Yeah.
it's it's amazing how much the difference is. And I don't think that without having a Christ-centered recovery program that I would be here today. I think I would be one of what we call the 13-step princesses, where you hit step 12, life is great, and off you go.
Yeah.
There's too much complacency, whereas that's the other aspect of having a Christ-centered program, is that there's an accountability.
Yeah.
Your soul, your spirit changes so much that you now want to do better. You don't hit these 12 steps and go, okay, well, that's great, I've done my part. It's a daily change that occurs and compounds.
Mhm. And I think, and I want to just say, if whatever works for you, by all means,
Right,
please go there
right,
and let it work for you, but please work it as well.
right.
But I think one of the cool things about CR is that, maybe you came in there with the intention that you want to get help in your recovery of drugs or alcohol, but there's so many other facets that tend to just open up your eyes to, you get your eyes open up to discover about yourself. And I think that helps, doesn't it? Because it's not just about quitting using drugs and quitting drinking. You have to discover why you're doing it, right?
Absolutely. Drugs, alcohol, gambling, sex addiction, pornography, whatever it is, shopping, overeating, it's a symptom.
Yeah.
People don't just one day decide, I'm going to start using drugs, or I'm going to start drinking alcohol. They turn to it because of something deeper going on. And that's what Celebrate Recovery is. It's hurts, habits, and hangups. It's too often looked at as just something for alcoholics or drug addicts. And it's really not, because when I went through my recovery process, I was able to look at so many times along that timeline before I ever decided I was going to do me and go start drinking, before I
Mhm.
was ever going to do me and go do drugs. There were so many steps along that process, going back to even to my teenage years, that needed healing, that needed my thought process to change on how I viewed things and how I felt about certain things. And that is really at the core of what happens with any behavior changes. Whether it's good or negative, is what is the core of causing you to make you make that decision that says, I need to numb this out, versus I can face this,
Right.
or break it down into small pieces rather than I'm just going to avoid it altogether.
What else, if you don't mind me asking, what else did you maybe discover about yourself and working with CR and your hurts, habits, and hangups? Did you discover something that you're like, wow, I'm dealing with that and I was blind to it, or maybe I just avoided it, or what else was there?
Definitely. Pride and having my integrity questioned. Um, oh, I used to get so mad when my integrity would be questioned, like to spitting mad, crying, everything else, bound and determined. I'm going to prove that I'm not a liar. I'm telling you the truth. Let me gain all this evidence, and realizing that sometimes it's not about that. Sometimes, my journey through my recovery involved being in a homeless shelter for about 18 months in a long-term residential program. And I had a scenario that tested exactly this, where I was falsely accused, I was falsely punished, and something very calm and still, that still calm voice, told me in this meeting that I was in with a bunch of the administration, be quiet. And it was the hardest thing for me to do. But it was the lesson that I needed to learn, that sometimes it doesn't matter how right you are. Sometimes it's just the journey you have to walk. And sometimes the journey is taking it on the other cheek. That's not only Christ meant when you're being insulted or being harassed, but sometimes it's literally just life. Turn the other cheek. This is just the journey that you're meant to go on right now. And through that, I wound up being on kind of a solitary punishment, painting a stairwell by myself. But that punishment was probably my most peaceful time, my most content time, and my best time with God, where I would just paint and talk. And I also learned pride was a big thing. Because I had such a great upbringing and everything else, and I would look at the homeless person and think, oh my gosh, well, they're probably just begging so they can go drink or use drugs or get a cigarette or whatever else. And having been homeless and living in a tent in the woods myself, I came to the realization they're people too, and they're hurting for their different reasons, and they have their own battles and their own issues, but that's not mine to fight. It's my job just to love them, to do what Christ called us to do, to love them, to show them Christ's love, to show them hope and show them a chance at peace. And then it's up to them in their journey as to whether or not they walk it. But for me now, I look at the homeless person, and sometimes, I see the characters out there that they probably make a pretty good living at doing it. I know there's plenty out there that, yes, they'll use that money for drugs and alcohol, but it's because that's their coping technique. That's all they know to do.
Right.
And there's a compassion that comes with it now. And there's a sense of my pride is no longer in my things, in my possessions, in my bank account. My pride is in the impact I make on the world and the difference I make to others now.
You are an advocate to fight the me disease.
Yes. The great American me disease. Yes. Yeah.
Kristina, do you ever find yourself just in a situation where you struggle still with anything? And I mean, do you ever find yourself just going, I have to watch myself, I have to talk to people, I have to get into something right now to get out of the situation?
I don't think it's as panicked as much anymore now. It used to be very much, but then I realized that, again, there's that process that happens well before then. Relapse happens in the mind before it ever happens in the body, regardless of what it is. So the further you come along in your journey, and I'm going on 7 years now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. The further you go along in your journey, the more introspection you do, and as long as you continue to work that. It's not a destination, it's a journey. 7 years later, it's still a journey. You learn those thought patterns of, I'm starting down this negative self-thought pattern right now, that let me play this out in my mind. These are the decisions I could make that could be followed by these choices, and I could wind up back in addiction. Let me focus on this thought process now. Why am I feeling this way? Is it based in reality? And what does God say about it? And sometimes I can't see the forest for the trees. So absolutely, that's when it's essential to reach out, to have a sponsor, or even not a sponsor, but just a group of people that have walked this journey with you that can help you go, well, look at it from this way. Or let me pray with you and fervently and truly pray with you. That makes all the difference in the world. That's the lifeline. And you can't, no matter how far you are in recovery, you can't just cut that lifeline.
Right. When you are approached by somebody who obviously needs help, how frustrating is it for you when they don't take that first step? Because you want to help them so bad, but you can't.
Yeah, it used to be a lot more frustrating. I mean, it was kind of that fresh, newly recovered, I want to save everybody, and it often winds up being, I want to save the people that I cared about in that life. And that's honestly probably the last ones you're able to help.
Right.
The best way to help them, and I've been approached by several of my so-called friends from that time period that have So the best example I set for them was just living my life. And that taught me a lot. And getting into intervention taught me a lot too, in the sense that nobody's going to take that first step until they're ready. And it can be pressure from friends, it can be pressure from family, it can be because it's the right thing to do. But until there is an internal brokenness before Christ and a willingness to say, I need help, I can't do this by myself, until they get to that point, it's not going to work. And sometimes people take that first step without being quite there, and then they get to that point later, and I'm happy for them too. But yeah, it's frustrating to watch people not take the advice or take the first step and falter right away. But I know that, like, my story is different. My story is different from everybody else. Some people have to get up and fall down a million times before they learn how to walk. And it's heartbreaking, but the best thing that anybody can do if you're watching somebody in that position is love them, not enable them, but to love them, and to just constantly be a reminder that there is hope and there is a path when they choose to walk it.
Do you think that what is something that you could say to somebody who maybe is faced with a family member right now who is just because this is something I get approached with all the time, and I'm asking for my personal sake and maybe somebody who's going to watch this, but I get approached with my brother, my sister, my son, my daughter, my husband, my wife. I know they have a problem and I'm trying to get them to a meeting. I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to do that. And I often say, well, I can't do anything for them until they want to do it for themselves. And then maybe something really kind of bad happens to them, or maybe they have to go through something on their own journey to actually get to that meeting. But in the meantime, as a person in recovery, and like you said, you have that sort of fresh-faced recovery where you want to go out and save everybody, but at the same time, being called to have compassion and being called to kind of watch your boundaries as well.
Yes.
What would you say to somebody about the balance of that?
The best piece of advice I ever received is something I still use today. The only person's actions and reactions that I can control are my own. So I need to be in a place where I'm healthy, where I'm able to make the right decisions and set those boundaries before I'm going to dive headlong into helping anybody. It's one of the reasons I really counsel people to be cautious about sponsorship too. It's a tough place to be in, and you have to know where boundaries are set. And that happens with family members, especially. It's somebody that you love. It's somebody you want to see better. You've seen them do better before. You know they're capable. Until they are ready to make that move, it's not going to happen. No matter how much you push, you love, you enable, you tough love, you cut them off. Absolutely continue to love them. But learn for yourself where those boundaries are. Learn for yourself how to set up healthy boundaries so that you are not being manipulated. I know this is someone that you love and you care about, and you don't want to think they're manipulating you, but I promise you, if they're dealing with a serious addiction or alcoholism, they're manipulating you. 100%. Yeah. That was the lesson I had to learn myself, is how manipulative I could be. And it's not even necessarily an intentional thing. It's a survival thing for that addict.
Yeah.
This is how you function through life. So you need to learn to protect yourself against that emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. So that's where, honestly, I suggest celebrate recovery for families of people that are facing something, because you learn things like boundaries and about codependent behavior and how to pray for people and how to love them the way that they need to be loved without enabling them to continue destructive behavior. That's the biggest message. And one of the things I love about Celebrate Recovery the most is that it's not just for the addict. It's not just for the alcoholic. It's not just for the overeater. It's for anybody who's hurting because of behaviors like that in their life from others. You can learn so much about who you are in Christ and the role that Christ has for you in their lives. I don't discredit for a second that situation is happening in anybody's lives for no reason at all.
Right.
You're there for a reason, and you have this calling on your heart for a reason. You just have to get the tools to deal with it properly.
7 years sober, right?
Yes.
Give me 3 words to describe you now compared to 7 years ago.
Whew. Peaceful, accepting, compassionate.
Wow. That's powerful.
Yes. It's only through Christ. Only through Christ.
Are you a firm believer that alcohol and drugs promise something that only God can give you?
Absolutely. So does shopping, so does gambling, so does every other thing that calls you for that instant dopamine boost, that instant gratification. You're putting a Band-Aid on a hole it's a God-shaped hole.
Man, I thank you so much for doing this with us today. It was
My pleasure.
powerful story, and I thank you for what you do and all that you do to help people and continue the cause against the me disease. Because you
Yes,
hit a nail on the head with that. I've never heard that before, but it's so true.
it is.
It's so true. And you're a great example of how you will not let your past define you.
Amen.
So thank you so much, Kristina.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.